Take your hand off her. Victor Moretti said it so quietly that the silver tray in Mara Ellis's shaking hand sounded louder than his voice. Caleb Ward's fingers were locked around her bruised wrist, his thumb pressed exactly where the skin had already turned purple. A wine glass lay sideways on the white tablecloth, bleeding red across the linen. Mara did not look at Caleb. She looked at the torn name tag hanging from her black apron and whispered, "Please don't touch the badge." 3 hours earlier, Mara had been polishing water spots off the same tray in the back corridor of Bellaforte, the kind of restaurant where the candles were replaced before they burned halfway down and men in tailored suits never had to ask for a second glass. She knew the rhythm of the place better than most people knew their own heartbeat. Which floorboard groaned near the wine room? Which camera above the hallway had been dead since the renovation? Which VIP guests smiled at waitresses only when they wanted something carried, hidden, or forgotten? Her name tag sat crooked on her apron because the clasp had broken 2 nights ago. She had fixed it with a safety pin and a strip of clear tape, careful not to cover the tiny seam along the back. No one noticed things like that. No one noticed Mara unless she was in the way. She was 32, soft-bodied, careful, and always 5 minutes early. The manager called her dependable when he needed a double shift and emotional when she asked why her tips were short. She had learned to keep receipts. Folded ones in her locker. Photographed ones on the cracked old phone she kept in her shoe box. Numbers mattered. Dates mattered. Men like Daniel Cross and Caleb Ward survived because women like Mara were expected to forget the details. That night, Bellaforte had closed early for a private dinner. Victor Moretti sat at the head of the VIP table, black suit, untouched bourbon, 2 men behind him who did not blink much. Mara had served him before. He was not cruel. Cruel men wasted words. Victor saved his. Caleb arrived after dessert, smiling like a man entering a room that already belonged to him. Mara felt the air change before she saw him. Her palm tightened under the tray. He wore the gray coat he used to wear to court, the one he called respectable, the one he had worn the first time he told a doctor she was unstable. "Mara," he said warmly, in front of everyone. "There you are. We've all been worried." Daniel moved from the service door too quickly, as if he had been waiting for that line. Mara placed the espresso cups down one by one. None rattled. That was her small rebellion. Caleb stepped closer. "Don't make this embarrassing again," he murmured, soft enough to sound kind, sharp enough to cut bone. His hand closed around her wrist. Pain flashed up her arm, but she kept the tray level. The room watched. A woman lowered her eyes to her pearls. A man pretended to read the wine label. Daniel sighed like Mara had disappointed him. Then Caleb's other hand slid toward her apron, toward the crooked name tag. Mara's whole body moved before she could stop it. She pulled the badge against her chest. That was when Victor's knife touched the plate with a small, final click. He looked first at Caleb's hand, then at the red mark blooming beneath it, then at Mara's face. He did not look convinced. Not yet. But something in his expression went still when he saw that the bruise on her wrist was older than Caleb's grip. "Take your hand off her," he said. Caleb smiled wider, but his thumb pressed harder against the name tag, and Victor saw the tiny strip of clear tape on its back lift just enough to reveal the edge of something black hidden inside. Victor did not reach for Caleb's wrist. He did not raise his voice. He only kept looking at the torn name tag, at the sliver of black hidden beneath the lifted tape. And somehow that stillness made Caleb's smile tighten. "Mr. Moretti," Daniel Cross said from the service doorway, his tone warm enough to pass for concern, "I apologize. Mara has had stress incidents before." Mara felt the words land around the table like small stones dropped into water. Not a scandal. Not an attack. An incident. That was how men like Daniel made a woman disappear while she was still standing in the room. Caleb released her wrist slowly, each finger leaving a pale mark that flushed red. A second later, "She startles easily," he said, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "I came because I was worried she might do something that could cost her this job." The silver tray trembled once in Mara's hand, just once, and she forced it flat against her hip. From the kitchen behind her came the low churn of the dishwasher, the wet slap of a bus tub being pushed across tile. The ordinary sounds of work continuing, because ordinary places were very good at pretending nothing had happened. Daniel walked forward carrying a white envelope. It had Caleb's law office stamp in the corner, Ward and Hollowell, embossed in gray ink, so clean it looked expensive. He set it beside Victor's untouched bourbon. A wellness report, Daniel said gently. For context only. Mara's throat tightened, but she did not step back. She knew that envelope. Not the paper inside, not every word, but the shape of it. The first time she had filed a complaint about missing tips, Daniel had called her into his office and offered her chamomile tea in a mug that said Team Family. The next morning Caleb had texted, still telling stories, sweetheart? Victor did not open the envelope. He slid one finger across the seal, then looked at Mara. Complain about what? Daniel gave a sad little smile, the kind a man used when he wanted witnesses to think he hated saying what he was about to say. A misunderstanding with gratuities. Mara believed her tips were being altered. Caleb sighed. She believes a lot of things when she's under pressure. 12 faces shifted toward her. Mara felt them measuring her apron, her body, her shaking hands, deciding how much truth could reasonably fit inside a waitress who wore discount shoes and carried espresso cups for men who never looked at prices. She placed the tray on the sideboard. Carefully. No clatter. My tips were not misunderstood, she said. They were changed after closing. Daniel's eyes flicked to her so fast most people would have missed it. Victor did not. Caleb gave a soft laugh. This is exactly what I meant. Mara, please. Don't do this to yourself in front of him. What time did you arrive? Victor asked. The question was almost lazy. Caleb blinked. Excuse me. Here. Tonight. A few minutes ago. Daniel let me in to avoid a scene. Through which door? Silence folded over the table. Daniel answered before Caleb could. Service entrance. It was raining. I thought it best. Mara looked at Daniel's dry leather shoes. Then at Caleb's coat hanging over the chair beside him. There was no rain on the shoulders. No darkened wool. No wet footprints under his polished Oxfords. But on the inside cuff of that gray coat, near the seam, was a faint smear of the same lemon oil the staff used only on the private elevator rail. Her old phone buzzed once inside her apron pocket, a tiny vibration against her stomach. A bank alert she had been waiting 3 days to receive. Mara did not touch it. She looked at Victor instead and said, The service entrance camera has been out since Tuesday. Caleb's face stayed calm. Daniel's did not. And when Victor finally opened the envelope, the wellness report inside was dated Tuesday morning, 6 hours before Mara had ever filed her complaint. The date on the wellness report sat in the center of the table like a dead insect no one wanted to touch. Tuesday morning, 9:14 a.m. 6 hours before Mara had walked into Daniel's office with 3 altered tip slips folded in her apron pocket and enough fear in her chest to make every breath feel borrowed. Victor read the page once, then turned it slightly toward the candlelight. He did not frown. Men like him did not waste expressions on rooms that were already watching too closely. Caleb recovered first. Administrative mistake, he said, gentle as a priest at a funeral. Reports are prepared in advance all the time. Mara knows how paperwork works. The words were polite. The knife was underneath. Mara knew how paperwork worked because paperwork had eaten most of her life. Rent notices taped to her apartment door in Queens. Physical therapy invoices for her younger brother stacked beside the microwave. A hospital bracelet from her mother's last night tucked in a shoebox because Mara could not make herself throw away the last thing with her mother's name printed correctly. She knew dates. She knew numbers. Poor people learned them the way rich men learn golf swings and wine regions. No, she said. Her voice was soft, but it did not break. That report wasn't prepared in advance. Daniel's smile cooled by 1 degree. Mara, this is not the place. Victor's eyes moved to him. Just moved. Daniel stopped talking. The room seemed to shrink around the white envelope, the red wine stain, Caleb's dry gray coat, and Mara's crooked name tag. Somewhere behind the swinging kitchen door, a dishwasher hissed open, releasing steam that smelled like lemon soap and burned coffee. Mara reached slowly into her apron pocket. Caleb's hand twitched, almost invisible. Victor saw that too. She did not pull out the old phone. Not yet. She pulled out a narrow plastic card with a cracked corner and a black magnetic strip rubbed almost silver from use. A temporary staff key card. The printed label had been smudged by oil, but the code was still visible. D17. He didn't come through the service entrance, Mara said. Daniel let out a careful breath, the kind meant to sound patient. That card is for vendors. It was in the private elevator reader at 8:06. Caleb smiled at her with pity sharp enough to draw blood. And how would you know that, sweetheart? Mara looked at him then. Not long. Just long enough to prove she was not afraid of his face. Only of what he could still do with it. Because the elevator sticks for 7 seconds before it opens on the VIP floor. I was carrying coffee to table 4. I heard it buzz twice. A man near the end of the table shifted in his chair. Someone else cleared his throat and stopped halfway through. Victor picked up the key card between 2 fingers. You hear key cards now? Caleb asked, almost laughing. That's what we're doing. Mara turned the card over. There was a faint crescent of dried espresso along one edge. I spilled coffee on this card 3 weeks ago, she said. The night 3 pages went missing from the tip log. Daniel's face did not change, but his right hand moved toward his jacket pocket where his phone was. Victor's voice cut through the room, low and flat. Leave it. Daniel froze. Victor looked at the card again, then at Caleb's coat, then at Daniel's dry shoes. He still had not said he believed her. He only asked, who issued D-17 tonight? Daniel opened his mouth, but Mara answered first. Only one person can. She looked at the manager's badge clipped perfectly to his lapel, bright, polished, untouched. And he told me that card was destroyed. Daniel finally blinked, and in that tiny loss of control, the first real crack appeared. The D-17 card in Victor's hand was not expired at all. It was still warm from someone's pocket. Daniel's badge was so polished it caught the candlelight better than the silverware. Mara stared at it while the warmth of the D-17 card seemed to spread through the room, touching every lie that had been placed gently around her like a napkin over a stain. Caleb's expression did not break. That was what made him dangerous. He did not look like a man caught. He looked like a man disappointed that a waitress had forced educated people to discuss unpleasant things during a private dinner. Mr. Moretti, Caleb said, folding his hands in front of him. May I suggest we pause before this becomes an internal employment matter performed as theater? A few men at the table shifted with relief. Theater. That was a good word for making Mara sound dramatic without saying dramatic. Daniel nodded slowly, as if Caleb had restored order to a room Mara had dirted. I agree. Mara is a valued employee, but she is exhausted. She worked a double today. Mara felt the sentence pressed down on her shoulders. Exhausted meant unreliable. Double meant desperate. Valued meant disposable, only wrapped in nicer paper. A woman near the wine cabinet, one of the VIP guests' wives, looked at Mara's apron and then at the red smear across the tablecloth. Maybe someone should take her somewhere private, she said. This is clearly humiliating for her. For her. Not because of what had been done to her. Because she had been seen. Victor leaned back in his chair. He did not defend Mara. He did not soften his face. He only set the D-17 card beside his bourbon and let the silence stretch until Daniel's kindness started to look less kind. Bring the incident statement, Victor said. Daniel hesitated. Sir, the one you want. Her to sign. The manager's throat moved. Then he gave a small professional nod and disappeared through the service door. Caleb turned to Mara, voice low and almost tender. You don't have to keep proving you're hurt, Mara. Some people have already made up their minds to help you. She kept her hands folded over the torn name tag. The tape at the back scratched her palm. Pain helped. It gave her something clean to hold. Daniel returned with a clipboard and a black pen. The statement was already written. Mara saw the words before he placed it down. Employee became emotionally distressed. Guest attempted to assist. No intentional physical contact occurred. She read it once. Then again. The room waited for her to do what waitresses were paid to do, make the powerful comfortable. Daniel laid the pen beside her hand. This protects your position, he said gently. And frankly, Mara, after tonight, you need protection. Caleb's eyes stayed on the clipboard, but his smile curved like he had already won. Victor watched her. Not Caleb. Not Daniel. Her. Mara picked up the pen. For half a second, even she hated herself for how natural it felt. Sign the paper. Keep the job. Pay rent. Send money to her brother. Survive one more week. Then her thumb brushed the broken edge of her name tag, and she remembered her mother in a hospital bed asking the nurse to spell Mara's name right on the visitor list because names mattered when people tried to rush you out of rooms. Mara set the pen down without signing. That is not what happened. Daniel's eyes hardened and softened again so quickly it looked like professionalism. Then write your version. He flipped the page. Blank paper. A trap dressed as fairness. Caleb gave a quiet laugh. In her current state? Victor's gaze moved to him. What state is that? Caleb looked ready for the question. Agitated. Confused. Fixated on small details. Mara reached into her apron and placed one small receipt on top of the blank page. It was creased, oil-stained, and dated 3 weeks earlier. Table 7. 2 coffees. 1 tiramisu. Caleb's signature at the bottom. Small details are where men hide, she said. The room went still again, but this silence was different. Daniel reached for the receipt too fast, trying to cover it with the clipboard, and that was his mistake. Victor saw the table number before it disappeared, and table 7 had not been opened to guests that night. Daniel's hand stayed over the receipt for 1 second too long. It was a small thing, almost nothing, the kind of movement that would have vanished in any other room beneath polite conversation and the soft clink of crystal. But Victor Moretti saw it. He saw Daniel cover the table number before he covered the signature. He saw Caleb's eyes drop to the date, not the name. He saw Mara breathe in like a woman who had just placed her last match on wet ground and was waiting to see if it would catch. Move your hand, Victor said. Daniel removed it slowly. The receipt lay exposed under the chandelier light. Cheap thermal paper gone gray at the edges, oil pressed into one corner where Mara had probably carried it through the kitchen in her apron. Table 7. 2 coffees. 1 tiramisu. Caleb Ward's signature at the bottom, sharp and practiced, the kind of signature that wanted to be recognized. Caleb smiled with calm disgust. I have had coffee in many restaurants, Mr. Moretti. I'm not sure what Miss Ellis thinks this proves. Miss Ellis. The first time he had used her last name all night, and only because the room had started to listen. Mara looked at the receipt, not at him. Table 7 was closed that night. Then the system printed it wrong, Daniel said. Too fast. The silence that followed made the candles seem louder. Victor turned his head 1 inch. The system printed a closed table? Daniel's mouth softened into professional apology. Old terminals do that sometimes. We've been meaning to upgrade. Mara reached into the pocket beneath her apron, fingers brushing the cracked screen of her old phone. She did not want to take it out. That phone had her brother's physical therapy reminders, voicemails from her mother she still played on bus rides when the city felt too loud, and photographs of receipts she had taken in bathroom stalls with the sound turned off. It was not evidence to her. It was rent, medicine, proof that she was not crazy. She placed it on the table anyway. The case was peeling at the corners. One strip of tape held the back together. Next to Victor's bourbon glass and Daniel's polished badge, it looked almost indecently poor. The terminal didn't print it wrong, she said. I took a picture before the shift log changed. Caleb leaned back. Of course you did. There it was again, polite enough for rich ears, cruel enough for hers. The suggestion that keeping proof was its own kind of sickness. Victor did not touch the phone. Unlock it. Mara entered the code with her thumb. The screen lit up to a photo. The same receipt on the stainless steel counter by the espresso machine. But behind it, reflected faintly in the metal napkin dispenser, was Daniel's hand holding a key card. D17. Victor's expression did not change, but something in the room did. It tightened around Daniel first. Caleb's smile thinned. Daniel exhaled through his nose. That is not clear enough to identify anyone. No, Mara said. But the next one is. She swiped once. The second photo showed the shift log from that night. Mara Ellis had been assigned to Section C until 9 p.m. Someone had crossed it out in blue ink and moved her to VIP overflow at 8:15. The handwriting was neat, slanted, controlled. Daniel's handwriting. Victor stared at the ink longer than he had stared at Caleb's signature. Too long for comfort. Caleb adjusted his cuff. Even if Daniel reassigned her, that is a management decision, not a conspiracy. Mara nodded once, almost as if she agreed, then opened a voicemail that had not fully deleted. Static filled the room, followed by Caleb's voice, low and amused. She still thinks tips are the problem. Keep her near table 7 until he arrives. The message cut off there. Not enough. Not yet. But Victor slowly looked from the phone to Daniel Cross, the man who had run his dining room for 6 years, and asked, "Who is he?" "Who is he?" Victor asked, and the question did not land on Caleb. It landed on Daniel. For the first time all night, Daniel Cross looked less like a manager and more like a man doing math too quickly in his head. Caleb answered for him. A client. A potential. Investor. This is becoming absurd. Victor's eyes stayed on Daniel. I didn't ask you. The kitchen noise behind Mara faded into one thin metallic sound, a spoon tapping the side of a coffee cup somewhere beyond the swinging door. Tap, tap, tap. Then nothing. Daniel adjusted his cuffs, buying himself a second with silk and posture. Mr. Ward met with a guest connected to our private dining program. That's all. I moved Mara because we were understaffed. Mara looked at the shift log on her old phone, then at Daniel's perfect handwriting. You moved me before anyone called out. Daniel's mouth tightened. Caleb tilted his head, soft with pity. Mara, you're reconstructing memories from stress. That's dangerous. She swallowed, but her eyes did not drop. No, dangerous is when men change paper and call it memory. Victor's thumb touched the edge of her phone, careful not to move it. What else? Mara hesitated. Not because she had nothing. Because the next thing was not about tips anymore. It was about the kind of rooms a waitress was never supposed to understand. She opened a folder named Recipes because no one had ever cared what a waitress saved under a word like that. Inside were photographs of 3 VIP receipts, each taken in the employee bathroom mirror because the fluorescent light there did not flicker. The names were cropped, but the table numbers were clear. 7, 7, 7. Every receipt had been printed after closing. Every receipt had a private meeting fee removed manually. Every receipt matched nights Victor had entered through the private elevator with men who never appeared on the reservation list. Victor looked at them for a long time. Long enough that Caleb stopped smiling. These are internal records, Daniel said, his voice still controlled, but thinner now. Taking photos of guest information is a fireable offense. There it was. Not denial. Punishment. Mara nodded once, as if she had expected the blade and only wanted to see which hand held it. Then fire me after you look. Caleb laughed under his breath. She wants a payout. Mara turned to him, so slowly the room followed her face. I want my name off a lie. The sentence was small. It did not ask for mercy. It asked for a floor to stand on. Victor slid the phone toward his consigliere without looking away from Daniel. Copy everything. Caleb's chair creaked. You can't just take her device. I can ask, Victor said. Mara pushed the phone the rest of the way across the table herself. The screen lit again with a notification she had not opened yet. An unpaid invoice from St. Agnes Medical Billing. Final notice. Her brother's therapy account. Caleb saw it. Of course he did. His voice softened. This is why I was worried. Financial strain can make people see patterns. Daniel almost relaxed at that. Almost. Then Victor tapped the first receipt photo twice and zoomed in on the corner. Reflected in the chrome edge of the espresso machine was a sliver of paper Daniel had not noticed in the picture before. A contract page with Victor's shell company letterhead and Caleb's initials in blue ink. The room went colder by several degrees. Victor did not move for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel, the man he had trusted with his doors, his guests, his rooms, and finally understood that Mara had not been creating patterns. She had been surviving inside one he should have seen. Victor let the room believe nothing had changed. That was the first trap. He did not accuse Daniel. He did not order Caleb removed. He only slid Mara's old phone to his consigliere and said, "Make a copy." Then he looked toward the untouched bourbon, the fallen wine glass, the white envelope, the D17 card, the receipt, all of it spread across the table like pieces of a story that had been begging for someone powerful enough to read it. Caleb adjusted his cuff again, but this time the gesture failed to look elegant. Daniel stood near the service door with one hand close to the handle, not touching it, not leaving either, as if the polished brass had turned hot. Sit, Victor said. Daniel sat. The word had been quiet, but every chair in the room seemed to hear it. Mara remained standing beside the sideboard, fingers curled around the torn edge of her apron. Her wrist ached in a slow pulse. She could still feel Caleb's hand there, the old bruise beneath the new pain, but pain was honest. Pain did not rewrite dates or change ink or call itself concern. Victor turned to her. You said the elevator buzzed twice. Mara nodded. It always does when the private lift comes from the garage. Once at the reader. Once when the door sticks. Caleb gave a faint smile. This is what I mean. She builds entire theories around sounds. Victor looked at him. Then repeat the sound. Caleb blinked. What? The private elevator, Victor said. You used it tonight. Repeat the sound. The room went still. It was a ridiculous request until it wasn't. Men like Caleb did not memorize the sounds of places they believed belonged to them. Women like Mara did, because sound told them when to move, when to hide, when to carry hot plates through narrow halls without being blamed for existing. Caleb's smile returned, thinner now. Mr. Moretti, I'm a lawyer, not a bellhop. No, Mara said softly. Bellhops notice things. A few eyes moved toward her, surprised she had spoken at all. Daniel tried to save him. The elevator chime has been inconsistent since the renovation. Victor lifted one finger. His consigliere, Luca, stepped to the wall panel beside the wine cabinet and pressed a code. A small camera light above the private elevator blinked from red to green. The file began loading on the room's monitor, a gray bar creeping forward inch by inch. Nobody breathed normally while it moved. Caleb's phone vibrated on the table. Once. Twice. The screen lit face down, throwing a thin blue glow onto the linen. He did not touch it. Daniel looked at it and looked away too quickly. Victor saw both looks. Mara saw something smaller. Caleb's left thumb rubbed the inside of his ring finger, though he no longer wore the ring he had once given her. He did that whenever he was waiting for someone else to fix what he had broken. The coat, Mara said. Her voice was not loud, but it changed the air. Victor looked at her. What about it? He said he came through the service entrance because it was raining, but his coat is dry outside. Caleb laughed once. We're back to fabric now. Inside cuff, Mara said. Lemon oil. Victor's eyes moved to the gray coat hanging over the chair. Daniel's face lost color so carefully it almost looked like shadow. Luca picked up the coat with 2 fingers and turned the cuff toward the light. A faint yellow smear marked the seam. The same lemon oil the staff used on the private elevator rail every night after closing. Victor did not smile. He only asked Daniel, who cleaned the private rail tonight? Daniel swallowed. Mara did. No, Mara said. I was moved to VIP overflow at 8:15. The loading bar reached 98% and stopped. The room held there, trapped inside 2 missing inches of proof. Then the monitor flashed to life, showing the private elevator hallway at 8:06 p.m. Daniel stood beside Caleb, handing him something small and white. A key card. D17. Caleb's face did not collapse. He was too practiced for that. But he finally looked at Mara, not with pity, not with ownership, but with recognition. She was not alone at the table anymore. Caleb looked at Mara as if the room had betrayed him by letting her become visible. The screen still held the frozen image of Daniel's hand passing him the D17 card at 8:06 p.m., the timestamp glowing in the corner like a number carved into stone. No one moved. Not the guests who had judged her apron. Not Daniel, whose polished manager badge suddenly looked cheap beneath the chandelier. Not Caleb, whose phone kept vibrating face down on the linen, buzzing in tiny bursts like a trapped insect. Victor stood very slowly. The chair did not scrape. Somehow that made it worse. Play the next file, he said. Luca touched the keyboard. Daniel's voice came first, thin and private through the speakers. Make her grab you first if you can. Then Caleb, amused, almost bored. And if she doesn't? A pause. The faint hum of the employee locker room. The recorder had been close enough to catch Daniel's breath. Then make her look scared. She still apologizes when people hurt her. Mara closed her eyes for half a second, not because the words surprised her, but because hearing them in the room where everyone had doubted her made the old humiliation become solid, something with weight and edges. Caleb reached for the phone. Victor's hand came down on the table once. Not hard, just flat. Caleb stopped. Finish it, Victor said. The audio continued. Caleb's voice lowered. After tonight, the contract goes out. Unstable waitress attacks VIP attorney. Your boss will bury her to protect the restaurant. A chair creaked somewhere down the table. The woman with the pearls covered her mouth. Daniel whispered, That's edited. Mara opened her eyes. No, her voice was raw, but steady. She reached beneath the torn name tag on her apron and peeled back the loose tape. The black sliver Victor had seen earlier slid into her palm. Not a microchip from nowhere. A backup card from the old hallway recorder, the one the renovation crew had forgotten because no one asked waitresses which corners still listened. That was the copy, she said. This is the original. For the first time all night, Caleb's face changed. Not much. Just enough. A small, involuntary loss of color beneath his expensive skin. Mara placed the card beside the receipt, the key card, the old phone, and the unsigned statement. Every small thing they had mocked now lay in a line like witnesses. Luca loaded the original. Same voices. Same words. Same cruel little laugh. Then the file continued past where the copy had ended. Caleb said, Moretti already signed page 6. He won't even know the replacement clause is different until the injunction hits. Victor did not move. The sound left the room without leaving it empty. His eyes went to the contract page reflected in Mara's phone photo, then to Daniel, then to Caleb. Something passed across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. Not rage. Pain. The colder kind. The kind a man feels when he realizes the locked door was opened from inside his own house. Page 6, Victor said. Luca placed the contract folder on the table. Daniel made a soft sound. Almost a breath, almost a plea. Victor opened it. The page was there. His signature was real. The clause beneath it was not the one his attorneys had approved. Mara stepped forward before Caleb could speak. The font is wrong, she said. Your contracts use 12-point Garamond. That line is 11-point times New Roman. I noticed because menus get rejected here for less. Nobody laughed. Victor stared at the page. Then at Mara. He had seen her carry plates past this room for months and never once wondered what else she carried. Dates. Sounds. Ink. Shame. Proof. The silence became so complete the ice in his bourbon cracked. Caleb finally said, Victor, listen to me. Victor closed the folder with 2 fingers and set Mara's torn name tag on top of it like a seal. Call my attorney, he said. Call my attorney, Victor said, and nobody in the room mistook the calm for mercy. By sunrise, the private dining room looked different under clean daylight. The candles were gone. The wine stain had been scrubbed from the linen, but the table had not been reset. Victor had ordered every object left exactly where truth had found it. The D-17 card, the receipt, Mara's old phone, the recorder file, the forged contract page, and her torn name tag resting on top like the smallest thing in the room and somehow the heaviest. Caleb Ward did not leave through the front door. He left between 2 attorneys and a federal investigator who had arrived without sirens, without cameras, without drama, carrying a sealed evidence bag and the quiet authority of consequences. His law firm froze his access before breakfast. The false wellness report was withdrawn. The altered contract was flagged for fraud. Daniel Cross stood in the same spot where he had tried to hand Mara the statement. Only now his manager badge was gone, and his hands looked naked without it. Victor did not shout when he fired him. He simply placed the rewritten shift logs on the table and said, You used my house to make honest people afraid. Daniel tried to apologize to Victor. Victor looked at Mara. Not to me. That was the first time Daniel had trouble speaking. The second time came when Mara stood in front of the staff, her wrist wrapped in a beige brace, her apron washed but still creased from the night before. She did not want revenge in her mouth. It tasted too much like Caleb. So she asked for records. Every stolen tip restored. Every false note removed from her personnel file. Every waitress who had reported missing money interviewed by someone who did not answer to Daniel. Her brother's therapy invoices were not paid as charity. Victor's attorney found the insurance denial Daniel had helped delay and forced the provider to reopen the claim. Caleb had used her bills as a leash. Victor cut the leash without calling it kindness. Then came the apology. Not whispered in a hallway. Not softened with excuses. In the dining room, in front of cooks, servers, bussers, hosts, security, and the same VIP guests who had watched her be made small, Victor set Mara's old name tag on a black velvet tray. The tape had curled at the edges. The pin was bent. Her printed name was scratched nearly unreadable from months of steam, grease, and hands that had grabbed what did not belong to them. This was evidence, Victor said. But before that, it was her name. And this room forgot what that meant. No one moved. Mara felt the silence, but it no longer pressed her down. It stood beside her. Victor opened a small box and took out a new badge, heavier than the old one, brushed silver, the letters engraved deep enough to survive being touched. Mara Ellis. Floor captain. He did not pin it on her. He held it out. She took it herself. Her fingers shook once, then steadied. When she fastened it to her apron, the room did not clap right away. Maybe because everyone understood clapping was too easy. One by one, the staff who had looked away signed their statements. One by one, stolen tips came back in envelopes with names written correctly. The old phone stayed in Mara's locker, not because she needed it to prove she was sane anymore, but because it had carried the truth when no one else would. That evening, after the last table left, Victor found her in the quiet dining room, placing 2 hot coffees on table 7. "You don't have to serve that table anymore," he said. Mara looked at the clean linen, the polished silver, the badge catching warm light against her apron. "I know," she said. "That's why I can." Victor said nothing, but his eyes lowered for a moment, as if the words had reached somewhere power usually protected. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows, and inside, for the first time, the room listened when Mara Ellis spoke.